Paul Hogan once said that failed marriages are simply those where two people stay together long after they have stopped caring. But at 86 years old, he is still talking about his ex-wife Linda Kozlowski as if she is unfinished business. They were the accidental Hollywood couple, a pairing born out of a movie script that turned into a 23-year marriage, one son, and one of the messiest public divorces Australia had ever witnessed. And yet, decades later, Hogan is the one picking up the phone to call her. It is not for romance, but for something far more urgent. What actually broke this marriage was never about love running dry. It was about two people who wanted completely different lives and did not realize it until it was too late to fix. But here is the question that lingers: why is he calling her now, in 2026, and what does this say about the parts of their story nobody ever saw coming? In 1985, Paul Hogan was 45 years old and desperate to break out of his reputation as a local Australian star. He had clawed his way up from a job as a rigger on the Sydney Harbour Bridge to become a household name through sketch comedy, but he wanted Hollywood. So, he co-wrote a film about a rugged bushman and cast a 27-year-old Juilliard-trained actress named Linda Kozlowski to play the American journalist who falls for him. But here is the detail most retellings skip: Hogan was still married. His wife, Nolene, had stood beside him since 1958, through 5 children and one earlier separation. While cameras rolled in the outback, something between Hogan and his new co-star shifted from acting into something far more intense. The people on set noticed it before a single word was spoken. But why did it happen so fast, and what does that reveal about the true nature of their beginning? Crocodile Dundee hit theaters in 1986 and became a global phenomenon, raking in over $300 million. Hogan was an overnight sensation in America, but back home, his marriage was collapsing in the full glare of the public eye. He filed for divorce from Nolene that same year, and the Australian press was merciless. It was one of the ugliest celebrity splits the country had ever seen, played out in headlines while Hogan was becoming a global star. 4 years later, he married Kozlowski. To fans, it looked like fate: two people finding each other on screen and making it real. What got buried underneath that fairy tale is a simple, uncomfortable fact. This was a new marriage built directly on the ruins of another. Foundations like that tend to carry a weight that nobody on the outside can truly see. Kozlowski did not marry an ordinary man. She married a person whose entire identity was permanently tied to one character. For a while, she leaned into it, starring alongside him in the sequels. But here is where it gets interesting, because most people stop the story there. Kozlowski was a trained performer who had graced Broadway. She was not chasing fame. She was chasing craft, and Hollywood simply was not offering the wife of Crocodile Dundee anything substantial. She later admitted that most scripts reduced her to the girlfriend of the comic lead. By 2001, she quietly walked away from acting altogether. But what did that decision actually cost her, and what was happening behind the scenes that nobody realized at the time? People often assume leaving acting was a clean, simple choice for Kozlowski, but it was anything but that. In 1998, she gave birth to their son, Chance, at age 40. She openly said that having her son made her happier than her last 2 film jobs combined, which was genuinely true. But friends later noted that as the marriage frayed, Kozlowski felt increasingly trapped in a domestic role she had never fully signed up for. She was watching her own identity dissolve into being known only as Hogan's wife. Hogan, on the other hand, believed that providing financially and staying loyal was the entire job description of a husband. He was not wrong that he did those things for 2 decades, but he was wrong about whether that would ever be enough for a woman who had once stood on a Broadway stage. They had 2 completely different definitions of love, and after 20 years, those definitions never quite aligned. By 2013, the tension finally reached a breaking point. Kozlowski filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She was 55, Hogan was 74, and their son Chance was 15. The settlement told its own silent story. Hogan kept the rights to the franchise, while Kozlowski walked away with a lump sum, no spousal support, and shared custody. There was no scandal, no affair, and no villain. Just 2 people who had quietly drifted into separate lives long before they admitted it to the world. But here is the part that feels like a cliffhanger. If it was truly that peaceful, why do so many people still search for a hidden, darker reason behind the split? The truth is, there was no hidden tragedy. Hogan later described the marriage as simply worn out, comparing it to a fire that started electric and slowly faded. He acknowledged that they were opposites in everything from music to food, the very things that attracted them initially but pulled them apart in the end. Kozlowski echoed this, saying it felt good to finally step out of his shadow and find her own light. After the divorce, she moved on, splitting her time between Los Angeles and Morocco, where she built a successful travel business and married a tour operator named Moulay Hafid Baba. She even proved to be a savvy investor, turning her settlement into a fortune in the booming Venice Beach real estate market. She was finally building a life on her own terms. Meanwhile, Hogan stayed in Los Angeles, but his own world was growing significantly smaller. Starting in 2003, he was caught in the middle of a massive Australian tax investigation known as Operation Wickenby. It dragged on for 7 years, and in 2010, he was barred from leaving Australia while the case played out, even comparing the experience to dealing with the Taliban. Though the charges were eventually dropped in a confidential settlement, the scrutiny left a permanent mark on his reputation. Then, his health began to decline. He was diagnosed with retroperitoneal fibrosis, a condition that left him frail and dependent on a pacemaker. He lost his muscle mass, his strength faded, and the man who once played an unstoppable action hero found himself struggling to perform the simplest daily tasks. By 2025, photos of Hogan being wheeled through an airport circulated online, leading fans to fear the worst. He laughed it off as a mix of arthritis and a skateboarding injury, but those close to him knew the reality was far more somber. The rugged image that had defined his life for decades was quietly crumbling. And then, the crisis happened. In May of this year, police were called to Hogan's home following a domestic disturbance involving his son, Chance. Chance was arrested on a domestic battery charge, a devastating blow for a father who had already been through so much. For a man of 86, this was not a moment to brush off with a joke. It was apparent watching his child unravel. In his darkest hour, Hogan reached out to the one person who understood the full context of their son's life, Linda Kozlowski. Whatever distance had existed between them vanished the moment their son needed help. This was the call from the beginning, not a return to romance, but a desperate effort by two aging parents to navigate a crisis that neither of them expected. People want to believe this is a story about a lost love rekindling, especially after they reunited publicly for the remastered release of their film last year. But Hogan has been clear. He has made peace with loving Linda while accepting that love alone could not keep them together. They are not looking back at 1986, they are looking forward, trying to save the one thing that managed to survive the wreckage of their marriage. So, was their union really a failure, or did it succeed exactly as long as it was meant to before they both inevitably became different people? What do you think about the way they have chosen to handle this final, difficult chapter?